When a high-ranking Mafia boss enters a confessional, he believes his sins are safe within the sacred walls of the church. But when the priest is found brutally murdered, one rookie detective realizes that some secrets are worth killing for. A missing confession, a rising body count, and a race against time to uncover the truth before the next victim falls. Welcome back to Mystery Minds, the channel where we dive into the darkest corners of true crime, uncovering stories that shock, intrigue, and leave us questioning the world around us. Father Gabriel Moreau was a man of unshakable faith, deeply rooted in his community. His church, a modest yet beautiful structure tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, was more than a place of worship, it was a refuge. Over the years, countless souls had found solace within its walls, whispering their darkest secrets through the thin lattice of the confessional. But nothing had prepared Father Gabriel for what he heard that fateful evening. Vincent Vito De Luca, a high-ranking Mafia boss, had been a familiar figure in the church. Despite his reputation for ruthlessness, De Luca had always sought the priest's counsel, perhaps as a way to cleanse himself of the sins that stained his conscience. Usually, these confessions were typical of a man in his line of work dealings in extortion, bribery, and the occasional act of violence. But that evening, his words were different. He spoke of murder, a calculated and cold-blooded act that went beyond the Mafia's typical brutality. Father Gabriel's hands trembled as he listened, his heart heavy with the weight of De Luca's sins. The confession was more than a moral failing, it was a declaration of evil, and the priest knew it. Later that night, the church lay still, bathed in the soft glow of candlelight. It was there, beneath the gaze of countless saints, that Father Gabriel's body was found. He was slumped against the altar, his throat brutally slit, his lifeless eyes staring into the void. The rosary beads, which he had so often clutched in prayer, were now wrapped tightly around his fingers, as though he had been seeking divine protection in his final moments. The scene was both serene and horrifying, the sanctity of the church violated by a ruthless act of violence. The investigation fell into the hands of Detective Ryan Calloway, a rookie detective known more for his sharp instincts than his experience. Fresh out of the academy, he was determined to prove himself, but the sight of the murdered priest left him unsettled. This wasn't just a random act of violence, it felt calculated, almost ritualistic. Something about the way the rosary was wrapped around Father Gabriel's hands suggested the killer had a deeper message to send. As Calloway combed through the scene, he noticed something odd. Father Gabriel was known to carry a small, leather-bound notebook. He used it to jot down reflections, scripture, and occasionally details of particularly troubling confessions. But the notebook was missing. Had the priest recorded something damning? Something someone was willing to kill for? Calloway's gut told him this was no ordinary crime. The investigation grew murkier when Calloway discovered the church had been receiving anonymous donations for months, sums that far exceeded the community's typical offerings. It didn't take long for him to link the donations back to De Luca. Was this blood money? Was the priest being paid to keep quiet? Or was he being threatened? Each question only deepened the mystery. Calloway's inquiries led him to the church's longtime janitor, Angelo Rizzo, an elderly man with a keen eye for detail. Angelo revealed that he had seen someone leaving the church shortly after nightfall, just before he discovered Father Gabriel's body. The figure was cloaked in shadow, their features hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but Angelo was certain of one thing: they hadn't come to pray. Meanwhile, rumors began to swirl in the criminal underworld. Word spread that De Luca had been betrayed, that someone within his own ranks had been feeding information to the authorities. Tensions were high, and anyone associated with the mob was keeping their heads down. If the missing notebook contained evidence of this betrayal, it could explain why Father Gabriel had been silenced. As Calloway delved deeper, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. His phone calls were interrupted by strange clicks, and on more than one occasion, he spotted the same black sedan idling near his apartment. Someone was following his every move, desperate to keep him off the trail. The rookie detective was in over his head, and he knew it. But he couldn't walk away, not when the truth was so close. With each passing day, the shadows around Father Gabriel's murder grew darker. The missing notebook became an obsession for Calloway, a puzzle piece he couldn't place. And as he traced the priest's final steps, one thing became clear: whoever killed Father Gabriel wasn't just covering up a crime. They were protecting a secret so dangerous, so explosive, that it threatened to bring down an entire empire. In the quiet of his small office, Calloway laid out the scant evidence. He had a blood-stained rosary, a list of donations, and a single, unshakable hunch. Somewhere in the darkness, the killer watched, waiting for the detective to make a mistake. But Calloway was ready. This was no longer just about justice for a murdered priest. It was about survival in a city where trust was a commodity and secrets were worth killing for. Would Calloway find the missing confession before the killer found him? Or would Father Gabriel's secrets remain buried forever, entombed beneath layers of fear, corruption, and blood? Only time would tell. Detective Ryan Calloway barely had time to process the murder of Father Gabriel before another body surfaced. The crime scene was a narrow alleyway behind a run-down bar, the kind of place where secrets were whispered and debts were paid in blood. Lying lifeless in the dirt was Leo Santoro, a small-time informant with ties to the DeLuca crime family. His throat had been slit, the wound eerily similar to the priest's, but it was what lay beside him that sent a shiver down Calloway's spine. A rosary, identical to the one found wrapped around Father Gabriel's fingers. The connection was undeniable. Someone was sending a message, and Calloway needed to figure out what it meant before the body count climbed any higher. But Leo Santoro wasn't just any informant. He was known for playing both sides, feeding scraps of information to law enforcement while keeping one foot firmly planted in the criminal underworld. If he had been silenced, it likely meant he knew something too dangerous to keep to himself. Determined to uncover the truth, Calloway retraced Leo's last known movements. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station showed him arguing with a man in a dark coat just hours before his death. The footage was grainy, the lighting poor, but one detail stood out: a distinctive tattoo on the man's wrist. Calloway recognized it instantly. It belonged to Dominic Russo, one of Vincent DeLuca's most trusted enforcers. Russo was a man feared by many. He had built a reputation as DeLuca's right-hand man, someone who handled problems quickly and without hesitation. If he had been the last person seen with Leo, then he was either responsible for the murder or knew who was. Either way, he was Calloway's next lead. But when the detective arrived at Russo's apartment, he was met with an unexpected sight. The door had been kicked in, the inside ransacked. And lying in the center of the room, in a pool of his own blood, was Dominic Russo. His throat had been cut with the same precision as Father Gabriel and Leo Santoro. Another rosary had been placed beside the body. The killer was methodical, precise, and sending a clear message. This wasn't just about covering up a crime. It was a purge. Calloway's frustration grew as he realized the case was spiraling faster than he could keep up. Every lead he found ended in another dead body, and the missing notebook still hadn't surfaced. If the priest had written down DeLuca's confession, it had vanished into thin air, and someone was ensuring that anyone who might know its whereabouts was silenced. He dug deeper into Russo's past, hoping to uncover anything that might explain why he had been targeted. That's when he found something curious. In the weeks leading up to his death, Russo had been making large cash withdrawals from a private offshore account, the kind of money that suggested he was either preparing to flee or paying someone off. Either way, it meant he had been involved in something bigger than just another Mafia hit. A break in the case finally came when Calloway received an anonymous tip. The voice on the other end of the line was distorted, altered to mask its identity, but the message was clear. If he wanted answers, he needed to look at Father Gabriel's last visitor before DeLuca. Someone else had entered that confessional before the Mafia boss, and whatever was said might be the key to everything. The church's security cameras had been off. The deeper Detective Ryan Calloway dug, the clearer it became that Father Gabriel's murder wasn't just about Vincent DeLuca's confession. Someone else had entered that confessional before the Mafia boss, and whatever had been said might have sealed the priest's fate. If Calloway could find that last penitent, he might finally understand why bodies were piling up. The church's security cameras had been conveniently offline the night of the murder, but Calloway wasn't ready to give up. He turned to Angelo Rizzo, the church's longtime janitor, hoping he had noticed something unusual. Angelo hesitated before revealing a crucial detail. Shortly before DeLuca's arrival, a woman had slipped into the confessional. She was young, nervous, and unfamiliar. She had lingered in the pews after her confession, as if afraid to leave. Then, as DeLuca entered, she vanished into the night. Tracking her down proved nearly impossible. No records, no name, just a fleeting presence in the church. But then a new lead surfaced. One of the rosaries found at a crime scene had traces of cheap perfume, the kind commonly sold at corner stores. It was a small detail, but in a case where every lead ended in a dead body, it was something. Calloway checked with local stores, searching through receipts and security footage until he found her. A woman with dark hair, glancing nervously over her shoulder as she paid in cash. He ran facial recognition and got a hit. Isabel Costa, a former waitress with no criminal record, but a long history of moving from place to place, never staying anywhere for long. It was as if she had spent years running from something or someone. He tracked her last known address to a dingy motel on the outskirts of the city. The moment he arrived, he knew he was too late. The room had been trashed, drawers yanked open, personal belongings scattered across the floor. The only thing left untouched was a small leather-bound notebook sitting on the nightstand. Calloway's breath caught in his throat as he flipped it open. It wasn't Father Gabriel's missing notes, but it was something just as damning. Inside were frantic entries detailing a life spent in fear. Isabel had been the mistress of a powerful man, forced into silence after witnessing something she was never meant to see. The notes hinted at a murder, a betrayal within the DeLuca organization, something so dangerous that she had spent years hiding under different identities. She had gone to Father Gabriel not just for forgiveness, but for guidance, and now she was missing. Calloway knew what this meant. If Isabel had seen something worth killing for, then the same people who had silenced Father Gabriel and Dominic Russo were after her. And if they found her first, she wouldn't live long enough to tell her story. The detective barely had time to process the discovery before his instincts kicked in. The motel room wasn't just ransacked, it had been searched recently. Someone had beaten him there, and that meant he wasn't alone. The faint creak of a floorboard sent a surge of adrenaline through his veins. He turned just in time to see a shadow moving outside the window. Then, without warning, the glass shattered. Calloway hit the floor as gunfire ripped through the air, bullets tearing into the motel walls. He scrambled for cover, his heart pounding. The attacker was precise, trained. This wasn't some random hitman. This was someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The message was clear: stop digging, or die trying. By the time the gunfire stopped, the attacker had vanished into the night. But Calloway knew this wasn't over. Whoever had come after him was getting desperate, and desperate people made mistakes. He still had the notebook, and for the first time, he had a name. Isabel Costa held the key to everything, but only if he could find her before the killers did. With every step closer to the truth, the walls were closing in. Someone was orchestrating this from the shadows, eliminating anyone who stood in their way. Father Gabriel's death had been just the beginning, and Calloway was starting to realize that if he wasn't careful, he'd be next. Ryan Calloway knew he had little time. Isabel Costa was the key to everything, and if the people hunting her got to her first, she would never be found alive. The motel room attack had confirmed what he feared: someone powerful was orchestrating these killings, wiping out every loose end connected to Father Gabriel's murder. The notebook he found had given him a glimpse into Isabel's world, but it was only a piece of the puzzle. He needed to find her before she became another body with a rosary laid beside it. Digging into her past, he found a disturbing pattern. Every city she had lived in had one thing in common: mysterious disappearances of people linked to the DeLuca crime family. Witnesses, informants, even low-level members who had fallen out of favor, all gone without a trace. Isabel wasn't just running from a dangerous man. She had been a shadow in a world that erased people who knew too much. Her last known movement suggested she had been planning to leave town. Bus station security footage showed her, eyes darting with paranoia, carrying nothing but a small backpack. But she never boarded. Instead, she had disappeared into the crowd. Either she had realized she was being followed, or someone had stopped her before she could escape. Calloway's frustration grew as he scoured the city for any trace of her. Then, a break came in the most unexpected way. A woman matching Isabel's description had been spotted at St. Vincent's Hospital alone, terrified and asking for a priest. It was too much of a coincidence to ignore. By the time Calloway arrived, the hospital was eerily quiet. He flashed his badge at the front desk, demanding to know if Isabel was still there, but the receptionist hesitated before checking the records. The delay sent a chill through him. If she had been here, someone might have already found her. Then, a name stood out in the records: Marie Antonelli, a fake identity Isabel had used before. She had been admitted under that alias hours earlier, but had left without treatment. The nurse who checked her and remembered her clearly, noting her shaking hands and the way she kept glancing at the exit, as if expecting someone to burst through the doors at any moment. She had stayed just long enough to ask for a priest before vanishing once more. Calloway knew where she had gone, the one place she had always felt safe: back to the church. When he arrived, the doors were unlocked, the heavy silence inside pressing down on him. The dim glow of candlelight flickered along the pews, casting long shadows. He moved carefully, scanning the empty space for any sign of movement. Then he saw her. Isabel sat at the front, hands clasped tightly, whispering words only she could hear. But she wasn't alone. A figure stood behind her, barely visible in the dim light. Calloway's pulse surged as he recognized him: Vincent DeLuca. The Mafia boss had finally come to clean up the last loose end himself. DeLuca turned, his expression unreadable. The priest's murder, the missing confession, the string of bodies had all led back to him. But Calloway had expected to find a man with the upper hand. Instead, there was something different in DeLuca's eyes. Not the cold calculation of a killer, but something more dangerous: desperation. Before Calloway could react, another presence emerged from the shadows. A second gunman, face hidden beneath a dark hood, standing just beyond the altar. This wasn't just about silencing Isabel. It was something much bigger. A final act of betrayal was about to unfold. Calloway barely had time to register the movement before the first shot rang out. The church, once a sanctuary, became a battlefield in an instant. The walls that had once held whispered confessions now echoed with violence. And in that moment, as chaos erupted, Calloway realized the truth: Isabel wasn't the only target. Someone wanted all of them dead, and they weren't leaving that church alive. Gunfire shattered the silence of the church, the deafening echoes bouncing off the walls as Ryan Calloway dove for cover behind a pew. Splinters of wood exploded around him as bullets tore through the sacred space. Vincent DeLuca had drawn his own weapon, returning fire at the unknown assailant. Isabel Costa, caught in the chaos, was frozen in terror near the altar. Calloway's mind raced. This wasn't a simple execution, it was an ambush. Someone had orchestrated this, waiting for all three of them to be in the same place. The bodies piling up, the missing confession, the carefully placed rosaries, none of it had been random. The true mastermind had been in the shadows the entire time, eliminating anyone who could connect the pieces. DeLuca, wounded but still standing, fired off a final shot that sent the attacker crumpling to the floor. The hooded figure gasped, blood pooling beneath them. Calloway moved cautiously, weapon raised, as he approached the body. With a trembling hand, he pulled back the hood and felt his stomach drop. It was Dominic Russo. Calloway knew it was impossible. Russo had been found dead days ago, his throat slit like the others. But now, here he was, gasping his final breaths. The previous murder had been a setup, a way to throw off the investigation. Russo had been alive all along, working behind the scenes to eliminate threats. He wasn't just DeLuca's enforcer, he had been orchestrating the downfall of his own boss. As Russo's last breath escaped, Calloway turned his attention back to Isabel. She was still alive, but barely. The shock, the fear, it had all drained her. She had run for years, terrified of the secret she carried. And now, it was time to hear the truth. She finally spoke, her voice raw with emotion. Years ago, she had been involved with DeLuca's younger brother, Matteo. She had been there the night Matteo was murdered, witnessing something she was never meant to see. It hadn't been a rival gang or a botched deal. It had been Vincent himself, killing his own brother to consolidate power. Father Gabriel had known the truth, and when DeLuca confessed, the priest had written it down. That notebook had sealed his fate. DeLuca, still gripping his wound, stared at Isabel, his face unreadable. He had spent years silencing anyone who could expose him, but Russo had played a longer game. The enforcer had never been loyal, he had wanted to take DeLuca's place, using the priest's confession as leverage. When the notebook went missing, Russo had resorted to eliminating everyone connected to it, making sure no one could challenge him. But Calloway wasn't finished. The notebook was still out there. Someone had it. And then it hit him. The one person who had access to the church, the one who had seen everything unfold but had never been questioned, Angelo Rizzo, the janitor. Calloway wasted no time. He left Isabel in the safety of backup officers arriving on the scene and headed straight for Rizzo's small apartment near the church. The door was unlocked, the place eerily quiet, and there on the table was the notebook. Pages filled with Father Gabriel's careful handwriting detailing DeLuca's confession, but Rizzo was nowhere to be found. A note sat beside the notebook, hastily written. Some secrets aren't worth dying for. Rizzo had fled, knowing the danger that came with holding the truth. Calloway didn't blame him. Some battles weren't worth fighting, but now, with the notebook in his hands, the case was no longer just a mystery, it was evidence. DeLuca's crimes, the years of deception, the lives lost, it was all there, waiting for justice. As the sun rose over the city, Calloway knew this wasn't the end. The truth had come at a cost, and though the case was closed, the scars it left behind would never fade. Some confessions could never be taken back, and some secrets, once revealed, changed everything. The case of the priest's secret serves as a chilling reminder some confessions don't bring redemption. They bring death. But in the end, the truth always finds a way to the surface. If you found this story intriguing, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We have more chilling true crime cases coming your way, only here on Mystery Minds. Stay curious, stay cautious, and until next time, keep questioning the world around you.